Hi everyone, this is Ekaterina. So we just had our fourth lesson in college and we continued with our practical sessions, however with a little bit of a twist. So unfortunately our teacher was not feeling very well this week and she requested that we had our lesson in the online format. Now, Zoom meetings are nothing new to us after the 2 years of pandemic. However, it also meant that our practical session was also carried out in the online format. And that brought lots of discussions in our group about the differences between having the counseling in person versus in the online format. So I thought, well, actually, this will be a great topic for today's video. Let's look at the pros and cons of both approaches. Now, I will not go into the counseling carried out by emails, chats, or calls. So I'll be specifically looking at the face-to-face counseling versus online, with the camera on counseling. And let's see, maybe in the future videos we can also look at the other formats. And perhaps I should also mention that I personally prefer face-to-face counseling, and obviously as somebody learning to become a counselor, it does help to have your client in front of you, and I'll explain why later. But nonetheless, everyone is different, so please don't feel like you have to go with face-to-face. Make sure you consider all aspects I will discuss. And yeah, choose the one that fits the best for you and maybe give a try for both approaches before you make that final decision. So in the recent years, there has been a steady increase in the popularity of the online counseling, and COVID is just one of the reasons for this. Certainly with the online counseling, we get more time flexibility, and that applies to both client and the counselor. So the counselor might be able to provide later hours or early hours or even do counseling during lunch breaks. And the same would be for the client, especially if they are, for example, still working from home like myself. You don't actually need to go anywhere, so you're saving on the fuel, and the counselor doesn't need to rent an office, so they're also saving a little bit on the rent. So generally I would say that the cost of the online counseling is usually around the same as the face-to-face counseling, or sometimes cheaper because of all those kind of savings that I would say both the client and the counselor get. Nonetheless, I would also like to point out one disadvantage of the online counseling, and that is that you are doing the counseling within your home. Now, for some people it can be an advantage, but you also have to consider that if, for example, the client is not comfortable with discussing what is truly going on with them, with their family or their partners, they might still not feel comfortable to fully open up while having that online session, while being in the room where, all those things happen, or in the same house. But if they go to the counseling office, so they go to this neutral zone, a new place which is far away from their worries, from their friends, from their work, this can become a really good, safe environment for them to open up. So this is something that shouldn't be overlooked. It certainly is great to have that separate space where you can go and almost feel like this is your place to reflect, to open up. And yes, this is certainly one of the advantages of having counseling face-to-face. Now, another thing I would like to point out, and obviously this is something we get from our training, is the fact that the counselors are not only listening to their clients, but they also have to pay great attention to the non-verbal cues, meaning their body language, their face expressions, and the general kind of atmosphere in the room. So let's say the client suddenly becomes very tense. So you can see their shoulders clutching, their face expression changes. That can indicate to the counselor that the client is probably not comfortable with the topic they're discussing, or this is a bit too much for them. Maybe they're not ready to go into that topic just yet. So all this allows the counselor to better understand the needs of their client. Now, when we think about the online counseling, it doesn't really mean that you lose that body language, because in the end of the day, it does depend how much of your client you actually see. So let's think about this video. So currently you see myself in my room. Now I think you have no idea what is happening with my legs, so you cannot see them currently, and that's one of the things the counselors can also use. You know, are you constantly kind of doing something with your legs, or are your legs kind of intervened or kind of looking loose and comfortable? Anyway, you do see me, you see my face expression, you see my shoulders, and probably you see a lot of my hands, as I tend to do a lot with them. But overall, you do have a good sense of how I'm feeling probably from my face expressions. So that could be still enough for the counselor when doing online sessions. They might even learn something about the client by observing their environment, you know, what sort of room they're in, what are the colors, what are the items surrounding this client. So there's still some advantages from doing it in the online setting. And in fact, another thing I've learned about is a great skill that I think we'll be developing in the upcoming sessions, and it's called immediacy. So immediacy is an ability of the counselor to use the current situation to bring your client's attention to, well, what is actually happening in that counseling relationship. For example, if the client is not saying anything, but the counselor can tell that the client is angry after the counselor said something, and they have to make sure they, well, have that trust. So it is important sometimes to point it out to the client that it looks like I upset you because suddenly your face expression changed. And the interesting thing is that another student was able to use this skill pretty much straight away in our practical session when they pointed out to me that I was smiling while actually sharing something quite sad with them. And the good thing here is that as soon as they mentioned to me this, I was able to look at my own reflection in the online screen, and it really resonated with me. It made me stop talking and really think, well, why am I doing this? And there's certainly something not right here. So here you go, a great advantage of having your sessions in the online format, something you wouldn't be able to do if your client was in the room with you. So a great learning for, I think, everyone, and something certainly for me to think about in the future. And lastly, just to sum up on the kind of visual aspects and the non-verbal communication, please also remember that, again, you might have a client who has a good camera and they're able to show pretty much a lot of themselves during the counseling session, so the counselor can actually observe their face expression, their body language. But you might also get very different views, or you might even get just a blank screen. So the client might not feel comfortable having their camera on because maybe they are not dressed to the occasion, you know, they've been working in pajamas all day and they had no time to change. Or maybe they're very much upset and they're crying and they don't like their crying face, so they will turn off the camera. In all those cases, please, be aware that obviously you're not letting your counselor to fully support you because they're not able to also read your non-verbal cues. So if you are a client of a counselor doing sessions online, or you're thinking of doing your counseling sessions online, please make sure that at the very least you are able to have a good kind of online connection and obviously a good image of yourself. Now, there are a few other possible disadvantages in having your sessions online, and one of them is the fact that you can lose your connection. This can happen to the client, this can happen to your counselor. And certainly before you start doing your sessions online, make sure you discuss this aspect with your counselor so that the client knows what they need to do in such a situation. Do they try to call the counselor or the counselor calls them? For how many minutes do you try to restore your connection? And what do you do if your session had to be cut short because of these connection issues? How do you get your time back? So all this obviously needs to be discussed, and this is something that you would avoid if you had your session face-to-face. Secondly, as a client and as a counselor, you need to also consider whether you have too many online sessions and you feel just overwhelmed with that. Again, as somebody who is working from home all the time, I have so many meetings every single day. I truthfully just get tired with talking with people over the computer screen. So I really like to have face-to-face interactions. So again, this is something you might want to consider. If you have too many meetings and you already feel tired, do you actually want to have your counseling also in the online format? Or perhaps you should make an effort and try to organize something face-to-face. Thirdly, there is another aspect we have to think about, which is the limits of care for the counselor. Now, we already talked about non-verbal language, but at the same time, please be aware that some of the techniques the counselor might use in the counseling relationship might not be easily imitated in the online settings. So, for example, when working with kids, counselors might engage the child in a game while they're talking about something quite painful. They might use art therapy. So all those kind of very specific techniques, they might not be easily replicated in online setting. And also, even though this doesn't happen too often, however, there might be situations when the client is so upset that they would very much like to have a hug. And I had this case in my own counseling experience when I was going through a difficult time. My counselor gave me a hug in one of our sessions, and truthfully I'm very grateful for that moment because it helped me to feel that I was not on my own with all those emotions and my grief. And again, this is not something that we are particularly trained to do during our counseling studies. However, this could happen in the future. And I think the clients would really benefit from having a real person with them in the same room in those moments. So again, something to think about when choosing which format you will go for. And the last point I would like to bring to your attention is the fact that when we do our counseling online, the client always has an opportunity to just end the call. If the topic is too hard for them, if they had a particularly difficult day, if they just had enough, and maybe something that the counselor said upset them, or they just don't want to talk about that thing today, or even perhaps you just have like 5 minutes left till the end of your session, you had enough, you decided to cancel your call, turn off your computer and just go and do some things. Well, one of the things we learn in the college is how can we bring our clients to here and now at the end of each session, so that regardless of what sort of topics we discuss, more or less at the end we try to bring them back to balance, because we don't want them to leave the counseling room feeling very emotional. So it's something they call grounding. And obviously, if the client cancels the call, then the counselor cannot really perform that part of their session. So it leaves the counselor feeling quite concerned about the state of their client. Will they be able to calm down themselves or find that emotional balance? It might make the counselor feel very unsettled about whether they've said something and whether the client wishes to continue counseling. So it just leaves quite bad, I would say, feelings from both sides. And certainly this is something that would not happen in the general face-to-face counseling. So another thing to consider when choosing whether to do counseling online or face-to-face. But overall, please remember that even though I have mentioned a few possible disadvantages of online counseling, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. In fact, some people definitely prefer online counseling, while others, like myself, like face-to-face. But only you will know which format suits you the best. As always, thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any more questions about different formats of counseling, please remember that you can contact me via the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed this, and subscribe to the channel not to miss any new releases. As for the next week, I'll be going back to the CPCP model, but this time looking at the process of change for the client. So all the stages the client needs to go through in order to facilitate positive changes. But for now, please remember to take good care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.